evening. New season of Dialogues. We have Tim this evening, as you know. He's going to talk about the media we deserve. Tim is a contributing editor for Architectural Record and has been writing about architecture for 20 years. And he's recently established the podcast series Superurbanism. And I guess, I don't know what he's going to talk about, but what I do know he's going to talk about is, in the sense, the fragmentation and the kind of evolution of the media recently. Over the last decade, technologically driven, socially driven.
More than 20 years. Right.
So, there you go.
Yeah, 30 years.
Cool. I mean, everybody hopefully got the invite, so I'm not going to repeat what hopefully you read that inspired you to come here. So, Tim, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Wow, look at all these clever people that are in this audience. It's really absolutely bloody terrifying. Hello, some of the people I know. Hello, some of the people I don't know. Look, there he is. There he is. I don't know why we put him in red, blood red, but we had one of the reasons why I've been invited was that we had a dialogue. Hello, Simon. We're just talking about you.
Do you want less light so you can see better?
I don't mind. I don't mind. I'm cool.
Jack, do you want to hit a few lights?
It's up to.
Yeah.
I can see less of you. That's much better. I can imagine you naked, as I'm told to do. So Simon asked me originally to talk about podcasts, which is this Superurbanism is a podcast I do. I spoke to Simon as part of it. The thing about podcasts is that they are very interesting to do. You have a conversation, and then the output is hopefully interesting, but the actual process of how you do them quite dull. Lots of clipping and cutting, not very interesting. So I thought to kind of say why I ended up doing, despite being a kind of print media journalist, writing about architecture for the last 30, 20, 25 years or something, why I ended up doing podcasts. So I thought, well, let's think about that. Frederick Jameson, the great literary critic, died last week, and his exhortation was always historicize, always tell the bigger or larger history, always convey your criticism through historical means, always put what you're saying in a historical context. So I thought it would be interesting, hopefully, to put that in the widest possible historical context that I could. I was largely from 1999 till now I've been an architectural journalist, but for a short period, trying to do it now, do I have to press enter? Oh yes, I have to press enter. I worked at the Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal, and as the staff, as you walked in through the entrance for the staff's entrance, there was a quote from Gordon Matter Clark. Here is what we have to offer you: confusion guided by a clear sense of purpose. Now, this was a great catch-all if you have had a terrible meeting wherever no one really knew what was going on. Gordon Matter Clark said, "Here is what we have to offer you." So this is what I have to offer you now. But one of the key things that happened when I was working there was I worked on a series of exhibitions and publications called The Archaeology of the Digital. And the first project in that was the Lewis Residence by Frank Gehry. And what we did was create an EPUB, which was very cool and trendy in those times and seemed to suit the digital format. And we talked, what happened, Greg Lynn was the curator of the series, Archaeology of the Digital, a number of exhibitions, but also a number of acquisitions, which was supposed to show that the CCA was this very kind of forward-thinking institution who could assimilate digitally designed primarily the first projects which were designed on the computer effectively, and that they could take them on board and look after them and show their expertise. Not really true, but still it created the opportunity for us to create these publications. And Greg Lynn interviewed Frank Gehry, in which Gehry said, actually, you know, I don't really like computers, and they freak me out, and when I design on them, I hate them. Which was kind of limiting, but what Greg did, which was really good, was interviewed a guy called Rick Smith, who worked for him. Rick Smith was an ex-IBM consultant who was working on the CATIA software, which was created by the French aerospace industry, and he'd been working on the west coast of America in secret defense projects. Now, one of the quotes which I'd like to read, the killer quote which I'd like to read for you is something that I'm still trying to get my head around, and why I'm kind of historicising from this moment, and people are going, "What the fuck's he starting in 1989?" Anyway, but this is the thing. When the Rick Smith, when the Berlin Wall came down, you know, Reagan and that whole, I'm going to start doing the accent because that's the way the intonation is. Reagan and that whole political environment, the aerospace industry just died. IBM started laying everybody off. It was 2 days later that I got a call from Frank Gehry to my office. Well, it wasn't Frank himself, but one of his staff. He called and said, "Do you know how to build a building in the shape of a fish?" And I told him, "A fish is kind of aerodynamic. Sure." So this to me is this. I still can't. I'm going to be throughout my life going to be struggling to get my head around this kind of amazing cultural moment where you have the beginning of a digital relationship. The beginning of digital design is a relationship between model making, scanning the model, and importing that information into a computer, manipulated in the computer, then transformed back to models. So, but architecture is so often, you know, downstream of other cultural responses to politics and society. And I think here was a moment where architecture, the relationship between architecture and events and politics was absolutely instantaneous and immediate. And I always kind of think about this crazy moment where, you know, you have the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the kind of collapse of the collapse of communism across the whole of the Eastern Bloc, and the consequences of that 3 years later is the emblematic relationship of the Barcelona fish, which is, I would say, the first kind of architectural, completely freely designed digital building. Rick Smith there saying, let's build a fish. And the reason why that to me is quite, stick with me on this, podcasts, remember why he's talking about this. The reason why this is so emblematic, I think, is because of the technology that evolves from this digital first, designing on the computer technology that evolves from this moment, is also, is very, you know, you kind of, the book is the building kind of idea. This is a moment where the book is the building, but it's for our period, because you have this analogous process where you have CATIA is a software created for the defense industry, and it immediately creates a building. And what you have is the beginning of the internet is also a Cold War project. It's DARPA, which stands for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is a research agency for the United States military and its and associated industrial. It's the military-industrial complex, effectively, talking to each other. That's where the internet comes from. We think of Tim Berners-Lee and CERN as being the birth of the World Wide Web, but actually the protocols on which it's based are actually come from before that. And there's a moment where, you know, these two moments are analogous. And so I would kind of say that, just to flip it a little bit and talk about the politics, what we have during the Cold War, effectively, politically and socially, is a moment where shall we say, mainstream politics have its souls, its feet held to the fire. You know, there's an alternative. There's both revolutionary socialist politics within the country, but there's also the Soviet Union. There's also this kind of socialist alternative out there in the wilds outside. You have this idea that what we are doing, what politics is, what society is in Western Europe particularly, as opposed to the United States, is also that there is something else going on outside it, which means it keeps it honest, shall we say. Okay, the frame is decided, the frame of what is the Overton window of what is allowed to be spoken about is determined by politics in the Western Europe, but actually there's this other thing keeping it going. And we have the moment which is kind of celebrated as calling the end of history. Now this is a kind of slightly ludicrous term that Fukuyama, kind of the political scientist Francis Fukuyama talks about, which is that what we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is the end point of mankind's ideological evolution, and the universalization of Western liberal democracy is the final form of human judgment. The end of history, he goes on to that, but I'm still talking about podcasts. I'm going to get to podcasts, I promise you. Going big, back to small. So you have this idea that I would say that this building is a kind of, this is the end of history building. This building. It's created by in a post-Cold War moment, the design technology, but also the site, which is what happens after the Cold War is a kind of is globalization, a kind of spreading potentially across the world. It's this endless idea that we're all going to be playing from the same. We're all going to be singing from the same hymn sheet. It's Western liberal democracy in all its form. What that allows is Western Europeans, Americans to kind of export industrial processes outside to lower costs. You get free sites in ports, industrial sites, and you need to do something with them. So you have, I'm not going to get into the creative economy, but that's an interesting conversation in itself. But what you do is you have this software and sense of an endless potential, apparently endless potential, and that is kind of analogous to what is happening with the internet. You have this idea that honestly, this was the first logo that Wikipedia had for the first 4 months of its existence, the American flag, which kind of suggests where it's all coming from, really. It's coming from a certain position, a certain economy, a certain idea of how one. The endless freeness of the internet is a freeness to make as much money as you want to from it. The internet is talking. The internet, the first kind of politics of the internet is anti-globalization, even as it's globalizing. You kind of see the logo, the second Wikipedia logo, where they probably go, "Ooh, yeah, actually, maybe we want to think about that." You have this globe of letters. So yeah, it's these two things to me are kind of somehow stuck together. Now there's little old me, I become a journalist and I start working for the Sunday Herald, and now you're going to notice that RIP kind of turning up every time I talk about a publication that I work for. That's going to be a constant feature. So the Sunday Herald is created, and it's created in Scotland. I was talking to David just previously. Scotland had the largest number of newspapers per head of population than any other country in Europe when I started working for it. And when I finished, that statistic was no longer true. I like to think I wasn't a jinx. But yeah, it was an incredibly positive, interesting, fertile experience to be working in journalism. But the thing is, I joined as working on the website. I was incredibly popular with these traditional Scottish print guys, the English guy that worked on the website. But the thing about it is I hope it's not just me. I don't think it's just me. But one of the features of working within, particularly in written and print media or writing, working with new technologies, I think it's probably true, is you suddenly find yourself in a process where you're kind of feeding the thing that's going to kill you. AI is that sensation when you're basically at the moment we're kind of wondering, do we put the transcripts of the podcast up on our website? Because that would really raise us up in the search engine optimization, because the search engine will go find all these kind of keywords and go, oh yeah, these guys are good, so let's put them on the first page when the search goes through. But then what we're actually doing is feeding the large language models, which are going to be kind of scooped up and used by, you know, that new bar when you put into Google that AI search. You're just going to be, to what degree do you withhold and what degree do you give when you're working for your own demise, basically. Still staying on podcasts. Podcasts are good. So yeah. So I'm working there, and the one thing that happens the one thing about this kind of end of history kind of thing I'm talking about that happens, and I'm not going to I wanted to put up, I wanted to talk about this event, and I just refused to put up the image, and then it smashed a bit. Is that when this happened, I was working with a very small group of journalists. It's creative, collective, journalistic endeavour. The act of creating together, really, and which was so incredible. And an editor, Andrew Jaspin, who went on to edit the Melbourne Age, edited The Observer. He set up The Conversation, which you possibly know, which is a kind of model of a publication which is just directly sourced from academics. It's like a kind of straight from the source kind of thing. And he said gathered his editors together and said, give me the first page of history, which was just an incredible thing to say, because at the time everyone was like, shit, the world's going to end. And to actually be kind of like have someone say, make the first page of history, it's quite, oh, someone might read it. Things might carry on, which was a very positive thing to say. It was also very inspirational, and they all rose to the event. Sadly, there wasn't any role for the architecture journalists in that, but I helped as best I could. Which I think is also good. Also, I think one of the things that's incredibly kind of odd about this event, above and beyond its horror except everything else, I still don't think it challenges this kind of end of history kind of moment, because of its being just a kind of revolt, an act of revulsion against it, is that Mohammed Atta, one of the leader of the 9/11 bombers, was actually studying urban planning at Hamburg University. His dissertation was on the way in which post-independence Syrian planning had kept hold of French urban planning tropes, modernisation, and his dissertation was this kind of tract of kind of opposition to it. So, you know, you could think of many, there's many things to say about this event, but one of them is that it was an attack on there being a singular idea of modernity, I would say. This is outside what I'm going to be talking about. We can have a conversation about it later, but this idea of, he kind of eulogises the souks and the traditional street patterns of the city that these things replaced as this kind of the alternative to a Western liberal democracy and capitalist architecture. So this idea of the first page of history was kind of more pertinent to me because I was living in Edinburgh at the time, and the Scottish Parliament was being built. What I would say about this, so you have the idea that Mohammed Atta sees this kind of history as this kind of repository of everything that has been taken from a society. What you have with the Scottish Parliament is that, I don't know if you know Edinburgh, in Edinburgh, this is at the bottom of the Royal Mile in the medieval town. Above it, just above it, there was the Royal High School on Culm Hill, which had already been adapted to and being turned into a parliament, possible parliament, in the 1980s. Throughout the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, it becomes a site of vigil for the nationalists. There's a guy in a porter cabin with a bin, kind of, and you beep and go, hey, you know, Scotland, hey. And what happened is that this, and it was a, you know, it's a neoclassical building. It's a kind of would have sat very, an adaptation of it would have sat very well within a kind of idea of a Scandinavian liberal nationalist kind of look. But what actually happens is that Donald Dewar kind of goes, that's a bit separatist, that's a bit nationalist. He's a devolutionist. He wants some limited independence, but he doesn't want full independence. And he says famously that to have the Parliament there would be a shibboleth, and there's an interesting history to that word, a shibboleth of nationalism. So what we'll do is try and think of something else. Opposite the Palace of Holyrood, for a long, long time, this site was a brewery. Now, it was kind of, you can take that to seem as if it's a kind of, it's like a drink. Actually, the reason why it was a very, it was because all of the springs in the centre of Edinburgh popped up here. There was a series of wells have been created over a historical period for that. And the £40 million budget, which was ridiculous in the first instance, but most of the original £40 million was just people pouring concrete down wet holes to try and create a place you can build a building. And so the architecture of it is very interesting. You have the idea not of this kind of like nationalist symbol, or a kind of liberal nationalist, 19th century liberal nationalist, neoclassical. You go across every single country in Europe, you've got a kind of a parliamentary structure of some kind, which represents this kind of, we are ourselves, we will take responsibility for ourselves, we will adopt the kind of language of Greece, the Greeks, to be able to indicate that we are capable of governing ourselves. So we had a very different thing here. We had this collage, different structures, and the building. I am not a fan. I love these moments. I've put one of my favourite bits in the MSP's office. The kind of collage. Why is there bamboo? We don't know. But anyway, unfortunately, it's a kind of half-delivered thing. Dewar dies, Morales dies before they can deliver it. It's a kind of, and then a bunch of technocrats kind of basically try and do one of Gary's little kind of like little sculpture things. They kind of try and build, kind of just extrapolate a working model and turn it into a piece of architecture. But to me, so there's Dewar's fear of history as this kind of like threatening thing, and as opposed to Mohammed Atta's kind of like it being a repository of all that is great and good. But I tried to write about it, and it was so politicised. It was like, if you were a unionist, you hated it, and if you were favoured devolution, you thought it was a masterpiece. It was very difficult to write about it. And anyway, thank God, Vicky, who's here this evening, got me a job. I moved down to London, and I got a job working for Blueprint. And it was an incredible time, the noughties. We worked, we had this, we were basically Icon magazine had set up in opposition. I don't know if anyone still remembers. This is old history. You see some young people going, what of these ancient things does this man speak? There were two magazines, glossy architecture magazines. One was called Icon and one was called Blueprint. We were the best because we were both kind of like glossy and showbiz, but we also thought lots about what we did. And but it was good. We had this kind of like competition. It kept us lively. There was this dialogue as we were having this evening, as we all have, when I started blabbering on. And it was an incredibly positive time. But the clock was ticking. We had a great time because I don't know. I'll speculate, but I certainly felt that there was a finite time to this. I'd seen what was happening to publications around us and thought, well, this is an amazing time. But we tried to mix a kind of culture of critique, but also a culture of display, both, which is very difficult to do in a publication. But it's creative, collective endeavour, which is you people who work in architecture practice are very lucky because you still have that. And the thing that we ex-packs don't have, and which we sit around and kind of talk bitterly about, is that we lack that. There are a few left, but there are precious few left. We talked about the housing issues in 2010 related to London and the rise of what was genuinely the far right now. Then that was like when I say like people talk about far right, like, no. That was they were proper little Nazis then. Not like your Johnny wannabe Twitter types now. And we also talked about, showed the idea of public space whilst also kind of saying, well, is it really public space as well? But the clock was ticking. We had the situation where we were literally looking at an incredible step change in the print media. In there was this huge technological change happening, and which would, even in the most kind of docile and regulated political environment, economic environment, would have been very difficult to take on board. But what we have in the background is this strange kind of political environment and social environment and economic environment, as it turned out. And because what happens is that as we kind of start to try and assimilate the ideas of changing from one dominant form where the internet leads and the print comes after, we all kind of realised that this had to happen, but the economic circumstances were utterly disastrous. It's just at the moment when we are trying to kind of articulate this that I don't need to tell architects about the extremity of what happened in 2008, but trying to articulate between that step change between two different formats. Like historic 600 years had gone by. Trying to do that when the whole economic system goes tits up. So it was a very difficult time. But just before it, though it was kind of incredibly stressful, incredibly difficult, kind of interesting, and although it was tough at the time, quite positive, and something that I kind of remembered when I was kind of looking back on this. It was a very Owen Hadley published this book, A Guide to New Eras of Great Britain, and it was a very bold statement, and we'd actually Owen had kind of published for us, and then I said we was hanging on to this political. I couldn't work out quite his relationship between politics and architecture. I found it too close. I found that there was nothing between. I tried to articulate it. I did it quite clumsily. He got very upset with me, and he. I don't know. It didn't go well. But one of the interesting things was he published this. We read it, and we produced this in response, which was a kind of after he talked about, his book is effectively talking about the travelogue moving through the landscape of Britain and describing the kind of horrors of architectural horrors of recent architectural horrors of Britain, built through the PFI and Pathfinder and different kind of problematic kind of stupid new Labour policies. Admittedly, he was kind of bang on about it, but kind of reading the architecture as a direct. There was just like it was architecture and politics. I mean, this book uses architecture in a semi-subjective way to illustrate politics and vice versa. Well, if you read it, this book uses politics in an unashamedly subjective fashion to illustrate architecture and vice versa. That is equally a kind of a shortcut. And to me, to us, and Blueprint again, collective endeavour, it was like, well, there's something in between. So what we did was, and also a sop to the fact that you architects, you love an award, don't you? So we kind of dressed it up as a kind of an honorific, but for us it was a way of, but it was done through not dialogue, because we weren't really talking to each other in a very sensible and grown-up way, but it was done as synthesis. It was done as a kind of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You think that, we've read that, we will understand and propose a counter and alternative, and Owen's gone and written a number of books afterwards. I don't know, you'd have to ask him whether there was any kind of like from his side, but I felt that there was at least some kind of idea of a culture of exchange, even in the darkest moments of the of the economic crisis. But obviously, that's nothing compared to what came afterwards. We had that economic kind of collapse, but then what we've had since then, and this is when I'm going to flip back to politics, because even if it was possible, even if it was, okay to be able to deal with the economics, what effectively happened, and I'm going to flip back to this moment, when the internet arrived in the UK as an economic prospect rather than this like, hey, you can do whatever you want, man, kind of idea, when it arrived here as a serious proposition for companies to be able to publish on, it had already been hollowed out. It had already, what we had, and this alludes back to what I was saying about the eating of itself, the way in digital culture kind of like consumes itself. What we already had by that point was a situation where, thanks to the way in which, let's just take Google for example, we'll talk about other ones afterwards, but Google, we offer them our information, we give them our information. If you want to read Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, I would say her prognosis, her analysis of how Google works is brilliant. I disagree with her conclusion. What it does is we give them everything for our convenience. What they do with that information is create incredibly targeted and very specific advertising points. She suggests it's like, they're going to control our minds, man. They're not going to control our minds, they're going to sell us shit. And that's what they're doing with this information. That's what we're giving them. You try. Well, the whole proposition of magazines was the economic way. The way economic. I know there's people in here who know far more about this than me. So hopefully they'll take me up on some of what I'm saying. Was you give them architectural publications, the people that advertise in architectural publications, people that make cladding, people that make chairs, they go, architects read this, let's put our stuff in there and maybe they'll specify us. That's as simple as it was. But it was also a bit of a, let's give it a bit of a punt, probably that will work. How else are we going to get our product in front of people? You have this system where you can create incredibly specified people, where you can just say, I would like to speak to just the people, just architects. and you can create a system of advertising which is 1/5 of the cost of what it was when you were kind of just doing big banner advertisements in, and you could do it internationally. You don't have to pay something to one magazine in one country, something, you can just do it internationally. And when it arrived, so that's the economics of it, oopsie. When it arrived, when we would start to think about how do we create websites that can make money, oh shit, someone's already worked out how to make the money. Someone's already got the money. There was a couple of, you still see very high-end publications where you'll go to, like, I don't know, like a top Condé Nast publication, you go on and you'll see a kind of banner ad for a particular watch. But you don't really, what the rest, which is a specific direct financial transaction between Condé Nast and that person, everything else, the advertising you're seeing on the internet is based on some kind of, it's through Google. The only way to really generate money from your website is through Google AdSense, where you say to Google, I'd like some banner ads, I'd like a little bit of money, and they'll go, sure, we'll get you a little bit of money, we'll also take the information from you and from your advertiser, and then, a few months down the line, you'll suddenly find out that you don't really have that financial clout anymore because we've got the information, we know more about it than you do. So, it was a bust flush. So, but at least, there was still the idea that there was a nominal kind of, like, freedom to talk about what you wanted on the internet. But then what happens is, and I'm going to flip about a little bit, is that 2016 happens and there's the political consequences of what happened in 2008 plays out. The idea and what first happened in the end of history moment is that the politics where the left and the working class have kind of drifted off slightly, they're not really linked anymore, and there's a populist moment. And that unleashes all holy hell in terms of a culture of dialogue, really. There are two sides, but they're just shouting at each other. And I tried to launch a book, a digital book on, I don't know what I was doing, just before Brexit, and I was just watching it going, that was the worst timing launch ever, because the channels of communication at that time became social media. It became this way of managing conversation rather than we couldn't really, the companies came in, they started to control the discourse, as they say. But those are the waters that we swim in. I'm still talking about podcasts. I'm getting to the podcast, don't worry. Before that, I would say that this podcast, I really kind of helped me understand what was happening. That there was and this book, the end of history, that what had happened whilst we thought that the liberal democracy was going to be the dominant discourse and everything else had to fit into it, we had a moment where populism surged in, and working class, the working class vote went everywhere. And the end of history is a book which me was like, oh yeah, shit, I see, kind of see. I mean, I have not yet got an architecture of the end of history, in the way that Gary's was the end of history. But to me, that was a moment. I'm labouring this political point because it's just actually, I'm stopping right now, mate. Don't worry. Because there was just no way to have this. The end of this, the economic end of a kind of collective creative discussion about architecture was very difficult. When you thought you could kind of have a discussion about things, those channels became clogged with a kind of very divisive political debate. There was nothing into politics. I was no angel myself. But that became problematic. Of course, what we did, this was a project that I did, which was an attempt to kind of create a sense of multiple I did with Austin Williams, and it was an attempt to create a kind of idea of what is the architecture that comes next. What is that? What is that? How does history move forward? You've got Chinese architecture. That's parametricism, arts and crafts, modernism, Islamic architecture, Gothic. There was a sense that history, trying to widen and open a scope for a discussion. It's very difficult though to work with that was trying to work with digital publications and Amazon, and they're shits. They just every now and again they decide no, that doesn't fit our format, and you have to work it out. It's very incredibly hard. They're incredibly hard. You're second guessing it. But right, podcasts. I promised you. Reason why you ended up doing podcasts, because one thing that these guys forgot about: YouTube, telly, Google, very, very closely focused, and some of it quite positive on the written word. Written word, telly. One thing they forgot about was radio. They didn't think about radio. They didn't think how to monetize the spoken word. Now, probably using AI and probably using stupid idiots like me who puts the transcript of their conversations up on a website, possibly they could, but they didn't. They didn't. It slipped through the gap. And so when you're listening to a podcast and you hear someone go, okay, my name's Brian, and ooh, I really love a little bit of Nescafe to drink before I start my podcast. That is someone who is involved in a cultural project or any kind of project, able to get the money. He's getting the money. It's not Google. It's not anyone else. They get the money. I'm not getting any money at the moment. I'm not. If you know anyone who cares to sponsor a podcast, please speak to me later. But that is what's happening. That the podcast is this little glitch, this little thing that snuck through the middle, slipped through, and it's also culturally very important because I keep talking about this kind of lack of the culture, the collective creative enterprise. It's me, the guy that has to sit on his own writing. I get to meet the people, I get to talk to them. There's an exchange, there's a dialogue, and I am very, very grateful to Simon for I'm kind of intuitively understanding what I was trying to do and being involved in it. So yes, in the spirit of dialogue, please download, listen to all of them. There's some great ones coming up. I'm speaking to, I've spoken to Paul Robrecht, I'm speaking to Peter Frampton, and an